lot of reading and thinking. I'd like to do more writing though. Pretty much the end of summer now. We're coming into the end and the start of the autumn or fall season, however you call it. That's pretty cool. I don't know, I always feel like I kind of read less in the summer, but this year I've done lots of reading. In fact, this is the first year since I started reading, like, you know, again for pleasure, which was about 3 years ago. This is the first year I think I've done that without having a long extended reading slump, which is really cool. There's been a few books I did stop reading. Off the top of my head, I stopped reading The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera because I just thought it was really boring. I also was reading A Room with a View by Ian Forster, but I stopped reading that as well because I wasn't in the mood for it. Though I've rectified that because I've read Forster again, which I'll briefly touch upon here. I don't even know what this video is. It's just kind of like my thoughts. It's what I want to use this channel for, really, just get thoughts out there sort of thing. So recently I read Howard's End by Ian Forster, which is the Forster I read. This is pretty good. I don't really read literature from this time usually, especially not English literature. I'm not really a big fan of the way that people wrote back then, especially in the sort of very intellectual middle class sort of group. I'm not really big on that style of writing. The only author I really like from the 19th century was Charles Dickens. But I enjoyed Howard's End. I thought it was easygoing, it was funny, it had good insight, but it wasn't dense or anything. I got through it quite quickly. I thought it was pretty good. There wasn't much I'd say about it. I don't think it's a book I adore, but I did enjoy it. I gave that one on Goodreads, by the way. If you don't follow me or you're not friends with me on Goodreads, the link is in the description. I gave Howard's End on Goodreads 4 stars out of 5. Seems pretty good. I give a lot of, I think most books I read are 4 star out of 5. I read Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion. Really good. I know everyone loves that book. I wasn't sure what to expect. Yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed it. Read it in one day at the beach, which was lovely. So there was that. I've also done some reading for college, university, whatever you want to call it. I haven't read all of that yet. I read Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood, which was good. That was another really cool book. I'd like to talk about that at some point. I also read Orlando by Virginia Woolf, which I have feelings on, mixed feelings, honestly. I think the idea is great, but I didn't, what I was saying about like the way people wrote back then, I don't like Virginia Woolf's writing. It's like too poetic and like too much of trying to impress you and show you how smart and intellectual you are, when honestly I'd just rather read this story. Big David Foster Wallace vibes, if that makes sense. But the book I've been reading at the moment, I've been reading Murakami's first book, Hear the Wind Sing, which is also Pinball because it's 2 of his first novellas or novels put together. I'm currently on page 107. I'm enjoying it. I think it's pretty good. And this is what I wanted to talk about in this video. I have a lot of thoughts on Murakami, not necessarily on this book yet because I haven't really, you know, it's good, but there isn't a whole lot to be said about it. But what I wanted to talk about was something I was thinking about when I was thinking about Haruki Murakami. I've only read 2 of his novels. I've read A Wild Sheep Chase, which I loved, and I read Norwegian Wood, which I did not like. Norwegian Wood, my problem was a lot of it was the depiction of women in it, which people often criticize Murakami's depiction of women, but I feel like it's nuanced with good and bad depictions of things in literature, but I just felt like Norwegian Wood was very not self-aware. I think that was the biggest problem. It was way too full of itself, that what it was saying was okay, and the really weird things it talked about and the weird way it portrayed its female characters kind of felt like there was no reflection there was no tongue-in-cheek, there was no self-awareness. It felt very matter-of-fact, like you're supposed to like it. Whereas this one feels more earnest in a lot of ways, but it also feels more self-aware. It's younger and it's more ironic, and I feel like Norwegian Wood is also just really overly written. The prose is just like, I don't like that. This isn't minimalism, This isn't like pure minimalism, but it's so much more streamlined and straight to the point. And I love a good book where you can get a good feel of the characters and the environments and the ambiance, but it can get to the point, and you don't have to troll through pages of what feels like somebody going through a thesaurus to make sure they can get all the best, the most unique words in there. Like, that's my least favorite thing about amateur writing, how so many writers will become like unintentional maximalists because they want to make everything sound way more poetic than it is. And I just feel like a lot of the time people can tell that you're just trying too hard and that it doesn't sound authentic. In some ways, this novella feels like authentic Murakami. It feels like a young student who has something to, well, a young guy, he wasn't a student when he wrote it, but a young guy who has something to say, but he doesn't quite know what, but it's still a love letter to books and, in general, the art of literature. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think everything needs to be either earnest or ironic these days, if that makes sense. And I'm not saying this as necessarily a criticism of other people, but a big reason why I don't enjoy and consume a lot of booktube content is because I just feel everyone just kind of has the wrong idea. I mean, there's no wrong way to read a book, but it kind of gets these wrong ideas about what art is and how art should conform to their standards, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not saying that books don't have problematic elements, and if they do have problematic elements, they should be discussed. Like, I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is I feel like people will make excuses for those things as well, and sometimes people can't see that there are more than one ways, and it's all about the intent behind it. I think Charles Bukowski is a great example of what I'm talking about. Bukowski's depiction of everybody is pretty bad. He wasn't really just misogynistic, he was misanthropic, he didn't like people in general. But I feel like when he describes women in a sort of negative or objectifying light, there is still an attempt on his part at being darkly funny and reminding you that the character in the book isn't someone you should like. Whereas Murakami does it with such straightforward earnestness, you feel as if you're supposed to like and relate to the character, when it's like, I just don't relate to that level of earnesty about something like that. The thing is, though, people can be complicated, and I think I was thinking of this because I'm also wearing a TV Girl shirt, one of my favourite bands, and I was thinking about how recently online I saw someone talk about the lyrics, and how the lyrics, because the lyrics are very sort of honest about jealousy and lust and these sort of feelings. And some people label it misogynistic, other people will try and defend it and say, oh, it's satirical. But there's nothing satirical about their lyrics. It's self-aware and there's a tongue-in-cheekness to it, but the songs aren't making fun of people with those viewpoints and ways of expressing those viewpoints in art without it having to be justified. Because I'm not talking about like genuine propaganda or hatred, those kind of things, but I feel a lot of writers, myself included, don't feel comfortable being honest unless it's hidden behind walls of sarcasm and irony. And that goes for everything in life these days. I feel like a lot of people aren't confident being who they are without hiding it behind irony and satire. People have this very sort of wrong, I'd say, viewpoint of what satire is these days. It's like, if something is good at satire or bad satire, that is entirely your opinion. There's no objective measurement. It's how well it works for you as satire. There is no objective measurement. You can't go around saying, oh, this is good satire because blank, this is bad satire because blank. And one thing people really love to do online these days is have to give a disclaimer that every single thing is satire. And when you're reminding somebody so much that something is satire, it takes away from the point of it being satire, because you're just telling people what to think. I remember when Jojo Rabbit came out and it had the tagline of an anti-hate satire, and I thought that was such a stupid tagline because anyone can go and watch that movie and can tell that is what it's meant to be. It is a satire. It is not, quite clearly, obviously not a, positive, pro, that sort of viewpoint. Like, that's so obvious that's not what it is. But the fact that they had to tell people and distinguish, and it's like, if satire is that on the nose, it's not good satire. For satire to be good, you need to sort of have that, and a lot of people will excuse things that people interpret wrong. Like, if someone makes a bad taste joke and then someone gets offended, they'll say, oh, it's satire. People do use that as an excuse and a crux, but I think people are too afraid to say anything that isn't satirical these days in a lot of ways. And I just kind of think we're at this weird point in culture where everything is either an extreme version of like 1990s Gen X cynicism and the extreme earnesty of post 9/11 2000s. Because if you notice, like, films and TV in the 90s, you had everything was like ironic, and cartoons were ironic, and everything was self-referential and meta. And then in the 2000s, everything sort of became about seriousness again. Rom-coms were just normal, they didn't have subversions. We got dozens of war films, true patriotic balls to the walls war films. I think if you look at the cultural approach to things, we're at a weird point now where people are either too sarcastic or too earnest, and that does carry over to literature as well. For example, I feel like a lot of modern literary fiction is just so painfully earnest that it's frustrating, and so much modern poetry is just so earnest and just so trying to be beautiful and poetic, and I just feel we're at this point in the culture where we can't have an in-between, where everything has to be ironic or it has to be super serious. You have to love everything or you have to hate everything. And I feel that really does come through with literature as well. There's many writers online, sort of like Substack and such, who have this very almost millennial, post-Bret Easton Ellis sort of tone, where it'll be candid details about, minimalist candid details about them doing drugs or whatever, like that sort of thing. And it's all hidden behind such irony. And I think that's what's really interesting about, like, if you look at all the trends, all the pop music of this year, the way you look at it is the two big albums of the year are Brat and the Midwest Princess album that came out last year, but Sleep at Her and all that. And I feel like even though Midwest Princess is funny and it has comedic lyrics, it's a very earnest album. And I feel like, I know Brat has a lot of openness in the lyrics, I'm not necessarily saying that. What I'm saying is that Brat feels so much more, I don't care what you think, I'm ironic, sarcastic, it girl, that kind of thing. Whereas then Midwest Princess is like hot on the sleeve, these songs about all these facets. And I think that's a really interesting point. It feels like we're at a point in culture where everything has become so ironic, and so everything has to be funny and ironic, and at the same time there's also so much earnesty and sincerity that is just so annoying because it's so earnest that we just kind of miss this point in the middle. I hope you enjoyed my incoherent yapping, and I hope in the edit I can make this mean something.